Okay, so in terms of how you got into the IT industry, was it something you were, always wanted to do since school, etc., or was it something that's happened more recently? Just, yeah, the background to how you ended up in the IT industry.
So I joined Agilitas in March 2021. No natural desire to work in the IT industry, but I'd been made redundant from the world of football because of the pandemic. And I have typically always worked in mainly male industries, including the law, up until perhaps the early 2000s, when we started to do more work to attract females into law. And then, of course, football. I was probably the only female, and certainly the only female senior person. So IT not chosen, but I spoke to Agilitas back in March of last year, really enjoyed the conversations, thought it would be a great place for me to come and grow my experience, but also grow the business as well.
Okay, so in actual fact, it sounds a bit like when you came into the IT industry, it was a less male-dominated space than some of your previous ones. Is that fair to say?
I think it is. At Agilitas, we've got a headcount of 129 and there are 34 females. And we've got I think post-pandemic, the world is becoming more diverse. So we are seeing more females coming into IT, but not necessarily in roles that are perhaps less than operational and those roles that can influence. So I think there are more females, but they're not looking necessarily at this time, based on my experience, to work in the leadership roles.
Okay, and in terms of what you've done in your career to date, I'll be interested if you're able to share, challenges you've faced, and I mean, clearly the IT industry is a relatively new view, but just, I mean, in other industries, were there gender issues that you bumped into, or not specifically, they were just more career things? Just any thoughts you've got on that?
Yeah, so I think as a female, you do go through a lot of challenges work-wise, and I think certainly in the 90s, I was a single parent, and I can remember being turned down for roles because I was considered that I'd be unreliable. I think typically within HR, it was very much a male-dominated business, so it was more difficult to break through into HR. It was mainly services or ex-police, for example. And I think that the gender thing, if we call it, as a younger person would be, are you planning to get married? Are you going to have children? And then as you approach those stages and your children in school, it's then almost from a very negative perspective during those times, and it is getting better. How will this impact onto me as an organisation if you've got to go to a parents' evening or one of your children isn't very well? I think I said at the beginning of the interview, working in legal was very much always, coming through from a training contract perspective, males. And there was a lot of work and a lot of D&I work, although it wasn't called that at the time, to attract females into the world of law. And similarly, I've seen in the football world, we have D&I in the BAMI processes, for example. So I think gender has always been a challenge. And certainly I've experienced those challenges, and I've done the juggling that many women do. And I still think that there is very much a myth that if you are a strong and empowered professional woman, you have probably not achieved some of the things that other people might take for granted in personal life because you've had to forfeit something to get there.
And in terms of the role you're doing at Agilitas now, can you just detail what it is you're up to there now?
Yeah, so I'm the Chief People Officer. So I'm responsible for people. So that's throughout the employee cycle. As you will probably imagine at the moment, there is an awful lot of topical issues which surround cost of living and mental health, which means that HR has had to operate very differently. And I'm probably going to go out on a limb here and say, I think females are very adept at dealing with problem solving and solutions, and males approach females very differently when they're in a time of crisis because they feel more able to speak to a female, I think, rather than a male person. So a lot of the work we've been doing over the past year is about increasing and improving our D&I. It's about getting a better and more well-balanced workforce in terms of its demographics, whether that be age, whether that be location, or the terms of the role. And it's also been about empowering our employees as an IT industry to give them opportunities to move on within the business, whether male or female, should they wish to. So since I've been on board, we've had 17 people, for example, have been promoted into either better paid or more senior roles. We've expanded our performance management and our induction and onboarding processes. We've really improved our recruitment process. So taking away any threats, if you will, of discrimination or stigma. So for example, candidate at final interview the other week, can I start at 8 o'clock? Could I leave early on a Friday because of my child? We're not penalising our candidates because of that. We really recognise the world's changed. And in a world of social media, such as we have, where your reputation can be almost shred to bits very, very quickly, I think we've all got to be extremely mindful of that. Not to mention, you know, from a gender perspective, whether female or male, I think you can pretty much do any role that you really set your heart to these days. You know, and I think we're starting to see more of that. And I think that leadership teams are understanding that, you know, the sort of way that we used to do things, you either can't do them or you simply shouldn't, because your business won't thrive.
And in terms of when arriving at Digitalisation, was that what you outlined very much part of, did they say, please come and help us with this agenda? Or when you arrived, did you sort of help them to understand what they needed to do? I'm just interested into, you know.
I think it's more the latter. I think it's more the latter. And we were talking recently about this, and it's almost when you ask that question, are there any problems with your people or your company? We all say no, because nobody's actually asked the question. And so, you know, I've done a lot of engaging with our employees. I know them and I've got to know them. I work in Nottingham and the business is based in Nottingham, whereas a lot of our leadership team are further away. And I guess being local helps you to kind of break down some of those barriers which surround commonalities, such as where you might have lived. And I think that as the pandemic, and we came out of the pandemic, we have started to hear different voices. People have become more vocal about what they want and what they expect from work. And we saw it last year amidst the Great Resignation. More people will move on if they believe they're not getting their fulfillment of their psychological contract. So I think my role has been to facilitate change and to continue to work on change, not only to make the business a success, but also to improve the quality of work life and how we work. So turnover, for example, was really high. It was over 50%. We're now at 12%. And we haven't thrown loads of money at it because we don't have it. What we've done is we've just engaged more, we've collaborated, we've listened, and we've done that informally and formally via employee surveys, where we've then followed through on actions. So we've not kind of said, tell us what you think, and then we'll do nothing about it. And we're still a work in progress.
Yeah, and I'm just interested, and what you've done, has that been largely what I'd say human interaction? Because I know there's a, particularly during and since the pandemic, this sort of digital experience monitoring and, you know, sort of software that can help with that. Have you engaged with that, or has it just been what you'd call common sense, you having conversations with people and working out what's going on?
Absolutely. I think common sense. We've got, we entered the world of hybrid because people wanted that, and we're sticking with that. We have not had to do anything intrusive to ensure that our employees are working. And that's very much about trust, instinct, and observation, all of the old-fashioned tools, if you will, in terms of how we used to work with individuals. I think that digitalisation, can't say it, really holds a place in the workplace because, of course, we're now talking via Zoom and we do so much more via Teams. But I think we can't lose sight of the fact that ultimately we need to see and hear people no matter how, in order to understand where they're coming from. And if we consider that speech is 80 or however many percentage of our body language and looking into somebody's eyes and reading how they're kind of responding to things, we really need to make sure that we're still doing that as best as we can, recognizing we're not all in the same place.
And you mentioned that although you've achieved, sounds like a substantial amount since you've been there, it is a work in progress. So without necessarily giving away any secrets, you don't, but what other things are on your to-do list in terms of improving?
So I think it's giving employees more empowerment to understand their capability. We're still in a world where, for example, somebody who comes into, and we'll say the warehouse, doesn't necessarily either come into natural contact with, or doesn't have a belief that they can one day be, I don't know, a service delivery manager. And there's no reason why you can't. And there is still a myth surrounding, if you haven't been to university, then you may not be able to do X. So we're trying to break down some of the barriers about, I guess you call it imposter syndrome, where you can be, because we're going to help you with those tools. So we've done a variety of workshops and we'll continue to do those, whether that be about communication, empowerment, mental health, etc. We're also engaging more with training providers and with the apprenticeship agencies to develop people irrespective, whether for their own good or for ours. Because if you're motivated, you're likely to work better and more efficiently. And then, of course, we've got all of the topical things that surround cost of living. And as a small business, you have to be extremely innovative about what your key retention strategy is going to look like if you haven't got a huge budget. And that could be things that we do, which might be fantasy football, a Wordle quiz, pumpkin carving, whatever it is. But I think every business is being more innovative. We've seen it recently, office perks and what do you put in a kitchen, all of what comes at a cost. But at Agilitas, it is about the people, but it's how do we engage with those as best we can, recognising it is a small business and 50% actually work outside of Nottingham on a hybrid model.
And in terms of the IT part of the business, because I know a lot of industries are short of skills and personnel, but the IT industry particularly is very short, I think. Are you doing anything as a company to initiatives around identifying suitable people that, again, you mentioned sort of approaches to get them into the workplace, or are you tending to hire people that are already in that world that you want to change?
It's a combination of both. So for some roles, we've recently recruited a young guy with no work experience as an apprentice, so supporting him on the start of his career journey. We have had some apprentices in the past, and we've had students via some of the university placement schemes, and that's something that we're keen to do more of. In particular, we're working with an apprenticeship agency in London to upskill the current team and to develop almost a platform for them to move on within the business. As you can imagine, succession planning is a huge thing in our company, where there's an aging workforce, particularly operating at a senior leadership basis. And it's engaging with those key individuals even before they're thinking of moving on. In terms of like for like, we like many companies are struggling to recruit. So we start off with checklist A, and we might end up with checklist D and E, and we have to identify then how we're going to grow that person and how we're going to support them, but also acknowledge how much time and attention that person rightly needs in order to be confident and competent within the role. I personally think, and this is on a personal thing, I think that employers have got to be very agile about how they grow their company now, and shouldn't be, and I'll call it fussy, about holding out to the original job brief. I equally think that candidates need to be prepared to be honest and open about where their strengths are and where they need to develop, and to how they're going to plan for that development. Because we find that agencies, for example, who are putting forward a candidate doesn't have all of the skills, might, for example, just say, tell them you'll be able to do it if you show them. So I think the candidates have got to prepare themselves for their hard work. And I think employees, whether in the IT industry or not, have got to acknowledge that in order to grow your business or to keep it running, you've got to invest more time and effort, and acknowledgement that you might not get the candidate you were going to get 10 years ago because the world has changed.
And in terms, just back to diversity for a minute, in terms of what you have implemented, have you had a pretty much universal buy-in and understanding and empathy with what's going on? Have you found pockets of resistance where people are like, well, that's unfair because you're doing that for them and I want this? Or how have you just managed that sort of, introduction?
Again, combination of both. One of the first things I changed was just uplifting the annual leave from 22 to 25 days for everybody. So of course, those people who weren't on 25 went, fantastic, that's great. Everybody else who'd had to achieve 3 years length of service said, that's awful, what am I getting? That was the start of the journey. A year and a half in, as we start to make more changes and we talk about the benefits that it's made for all of us, actually people are starting to see it. However, we are really keen, which is why we do it. And certainly before I implement change, I'll ask my managers, what do you think? Because they're the people on the ground floor that are going to have to run my ideas. And if they don't work, there is no point. You can invent the best idea, but if it works for nobody except you, then you've not really had a great idea. We have done things surrounding benefits. We have done things surrounding policy. So we've got better governance. There's certainly been an upskill in line management because through the pandemic, all of that had changed because people actually weren't in the office and weren't engaging in the same way. And I think that there is a broad acceptance that we needed to change. And if we look at data would suggest that we're heading in the right place. If I look at it in a slightly different way, which is saying to somebody, what do you think of our culture? Do we uphold our values? Do you like working here? And broadly, the answer is yes, but I'd like to tell you how we can further improve it. Then we're going in the right place.
Okay, and in terms of maybe just as we finish, in terms of something that you still think, something that you could implement or something that you think we need to stop doing that, not necessarily within your organisation, but as the IT industry more generally, are there any sort of obvious things you'd love to change about the industry, or as I think we know, it's heading in the right direction, so sort of leave it to get there in its own time? Or
I think every company should do more surrounding of what does it really look like working in our business, whether as a female or not. So it's almost, the training program, the placement schemes, giving people an opportunity to come and see you and what you do, and recognise that an IT industry will have almost every type of job that you might expect in another business, that it will surround itself with IT product. There is an absolute myth still, I think, in the IT world. I am rubbish at IT, by the way, but there is a myth that you have to be great at IT in order to work in IT. And I think that as we head into the influencer social media world, IT and other technical industry need to be doing more open days. They need to be collaborating with schools, with colleges, with universities to say, these are the opportunities that we have. And this is ultimately where you could be in your career, and come and join us. And we've got a structured career path for you to follow. Now, that's really difficult if you're in a small company, but it's certainly the steps that we should all be taking, I think, just to open up the eyes of the external world to say, it really is no difference. You're not going to be a Microsoft expert. And in our case, we're a solutions business. So it's completely different.
Okay, I mean, it's been great to chat to you, and you shared some really great insights. So, Bev, appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. Thank you. I look forward to seeing the recording, I think.